So my name is Micah Cottrell. I'm 23 years old, and I am the campus pastor at Refuge Church in Mark Tree, Arkansas. And I've been there for 8 months now, and I've been on staff at Refuge Church for a year today.
Okay. Today, that's exciting.
Yeah, we announced it today 1 year ago that we were going to plant a church in Mark Tree.
Wow. That's cool. Okay, so how did you get into leadership?
I started into leadership. I probably took my first leadership position in a church when I was 18 years old. I started in sectional youth ministry in Section 11 in the Arkansas Assemblies of God. I started serving there under Gary Bell, who's the senior pastor of First Assembly of God there in Pine Bluff. It's where I grew up. So
Okay.
I got started, around about that time. I would say I was 18.
18. What's one thing that you wish you knew about leadership before you became a leader?
Wow. One thing that I wish I knew. There's so many, because there's different kinds of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
When I started, the leader I was when I was 18 is not the leader that I am, Jackson. Not the leader that I am now, that's for sure.
Sit down.
Sectional youth ministry is so different than church planting. So as far as what I know now and what I wish I knew then, I wish I understood the weight that pastoring carries. I wish I understood the weight that pastors do carry. I grew up in a pastor's home, but I had no idea the weight that a pastor carries for the ministry, for the burden of the church, and how that kind of weighs on you. I think that's one of the questions later, but I definitely do wish I understood more of the commitment that it took to be a good leader.
Okay. What has been your greatest reward in leadership?
Seeing other people developed into leaders. So one of the goals of leadership is to develop people, or one of my goals in leadership is to develop other people or disciple other people into a place that they can be a leader. So not just developing followers, but developing other leaders. So whenever I see people moving from a place of working in the church to equipping other people in ministry, that's, when you see that transition from workers to equippers, wow, it's rewarding.
Cool. What's been your greatest challenge in leadership?
Greatest challenge would be learning to deal and identifying different personalities in the church, and understanding, and not only learning that, but understanding that all of those have a place in the ministry, and not confining somebody to a single, one-dimensional type leader. That just because they operate differently than me doesn't mean that they are any less of an effective leader than I am.
Awesome. What has surprised you the most about leadership?
What has surprised me? I would say that that goes in with what's the one thing I wish I knew, and that would be the weight that you carry. If a leader really has a heart for the ministry, if a leader really has a heart for the church that they're serving in, they're going to carry that weight with them. And not understanding the weight of that. I remember when I was talking to my pastor about this, I was talking to him and I said, Pastor, all at once this just kind of fell on my shoulders. And he was like, yeah, we've all had that night where, the night before something big happens, the night before you step into a new ministry, God just kind of downloads that into your heart, downloads that into your spirit, and you feel the weight you feel the burden that God has put on you. I was not completely prepared for that. It was something totally different than, preaching as an evangelist or working in a church, but leading a church is something completely different. It's one thing to have a heart for the ministry. It's one thing to have a heart for people, but to lead a ministry, to know that you are responsible for it, I wasn't ready for that shock of the weight that it is to carry that.
What is something that people don't realize about leadership?
The commitment that it takes to be a good leader. So anybody can stand in front of people and claim to be a leader. Anybody can stand up there and say, I feel like that I can do this, or I can stand up here and I can lead this people group. I can develop this ministry. I can do that. But then when you step into it, you realize that there's a deeper commitment involved than what you were anticipating. And I don't think that people fully understand the level of commitment that it takes to become a good leader and to be a good leader, to develop other leaders, to develop and disciple people into a place that they can lead. I don't think people understand the depth of that commitment. I think we can get caught up in the, pizzazz of leadership, and then once we step into it, it's like, wow, I really do have my hand in all of these different pots, and I didn't realize that this was going to be that kind of commitment.
Yeah. Okay. How do you balance your personal life, life in ministry, and life in leadership?
Carefully. Very carefully. Man, when we first started out in some of this stuff, I know my wife and I would spend 12, 14 hours a day on a Saturday, because I work not just at the church, I'm even tri-vocational in some ways, whereas, I'm still a college student, or I work a secular job and plant this church and all of these things. So I work throughout the week, or I'm in class throughout the week, and then in the weekends are all tied up with church. And so early on in this, we were spending 12, 14, sometimes more than that, hours a day at church or on a Saturday, which was our only day off. And obviously, that's not the healthiest thing in the world to do, but I think so many people get caught up on that. People forget that ministry is a sacrifice, and sometimes we're so quick to sacrifice ministry instead of sacrificing something else. And while I don't recommend that people do this all the time, or that they even do it most of the time, there were some things that had to be done on those 14-hour Saturdays that could not be gone without. So people and that's one thing I guess that people maybe don't understand, is that ministry is a sacrifice. Because I've had to sacrifice a lot of that, time with my wife, time with my family, where, that's something that just, it had to be done. And we're quick to sacrifice, well, I do have to spend time with my family. And that's why it is a balance, is because there is stuff that needs to be done. But at the same time, I have to, my family is my priority as well. Right. So I have to be able to balance those two. And then I have to, there's a third arm over here, where not only do I balance my family over here in my ministry right here, but I have to balance myself as a leader. Like, as a leader, I have to be continually given to, continuing to learn and continuing to develop myself, because if I stop developing myself, I can't continue to develop other people. Leadership is like I call it the N-1 principle. If I'm leading at a level of 8, the people under me can only lead at most 7, because I have to set the bar. Right. And they're never the people that you lead are never gonna pass you in that. You've got to, now if they pass you, that's because they're under a different leader at that point. So N-1. So if I stop at 8, nobody underneath me is ever going to get above 8. So I've got to continue to move. And whenever I move, I have to make sure that I bring those up with me. So I have to balance myself and developing myself as a leader all the time, as balancing a family life and a personal life outside of church and ministry, and then balancing the ministry itself. So how do you do that? Very, very carefully and intentionally. Right. I would say that carefully and intentionally.
Okay. Did you always plan to be in leadership? And if so, when did you feel called to be a leader?
So, no. I probably didn't. My entire life, I did not plan on being in leadership. When God called me to preach, He didn't call me to lead. I mean, just because God's called somebody into the ministry doesn't mean that He's called them to lead. Because as an evangelist, when my wife and I traveled, I wasn't leading any ministry other than the Ford pickup truck that drove down the road with us two in it.
Yeah.
So there was no leadership development in that other than the leadership in myself or whatever. But there was a specific time a few years down the road that God called me and changed my calling from an evangelist to a pastor. And then when I felt that shift, that's when I knew that it was like God's calling me to grow something. God's calling me to lead something, which is kind of why I'm into church planting, is that I want to see God grow things. I want to see God work through people and develop them into leaders so that they can plant churches, so that they can do these things. And, you know, as much as my heart's in that, I have to be careful about my own self in that. And I would say exactly when I was called was, when was I called? Exactly. January. I was called to preach in April of 2000 and 2013, and I was called to pastor in January of 2017. So, being that this is the first church that I've ever pastored, there was almost an entire year, almost 2 years, where I sat there in that calling and wasn't able to step into it fully. And I did not plan on church planting. I did not plan on that at all. I knew that the normal ladder to climb in ministry is, you know, well, I feel God called me to preach. You know what? You know, I need to preach in, you know, I need to evangelize. I need to be on the evangelistic field. I need to get my feet wet in ministry and all this stuff. And, you know, maybe if somebody has something for me that I can work in somebody's youth ministry or that, and then if I'm successful in that, then maybe God will lead me to where I can pastor somewhere, and then if I'm successful in that, then I can multiply my church into different churches and allow people to plant churches from this church and all these things. And boy, God really just kind of jumbled my ladder all up. Yeah. And so I had no intentions of, it wasn't my lifelong dream to become a church planter.
Right.
God opened the door and put that in my heart, and I just went with it. And so did I have any forethought about it other than the leading of the Spirit? No. But I was still obviously very young whenever God called me to be a leader.
Yeah. What advice would you have for new or aspiring leaders, whether it be in a ministry aspect or in a secular aspect?
Be patient. One of the biggest things for me was I had many opportunities to step into a leadership position long before I did this, but I didn't. Yes, they look good. Not just because it looks good doesn't mean it's God. So every opportunity that comes down the road isn't just an open door, even though you can walk through it. So I waited for the absolute call of God to step into this. And because I did, I've been really blessed because of it. So for a new leader, don't settle. Don't settle, don't settle. Be patient and wait for the God opportunity to come. That there was things in this church plant, that there were some things in my heart and in our family that we had, you know, discussed that we were looking for in an opportunity in ministry. And when this opened up, it met every need that we had. And that was one way that we knew. Of course, we felt the Lord's leading in it, but it also met our needs. And that showed that, you know, God had provided And since he was providing for that, we knew that this was the place that we needed to step into.
Mm-hmm.
So be patient, be patient, be patient, and don't settle.
Okay, I have an extra question for you that I didn't send you. Does that make you nervous?
No.
Okay, so Refuge Mark Tree is a branch off of Refuge Jonesboro.
Yes.
So talk about a little bit about your vision casting process and how if it needed to if it was required for you to match up with the Jonesboro campus, or if you were able to.
Okay. So I've been given, my word, a mile of freedom in this. I'm thankful for the trust of my senior pastor in all of this. He and I, we do not preach the same sermons. He's even open for me to have my own vision and direction to lead the church, because we believe that we are connected. We are built from the same DNA, but we are very much different churches.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like a church split. It's not like people from that church went with me because they were upset. Now, I guess for people who may be watching this later, that when we launched our church, we took a team of about 15 people from our main campus to launch this church in Mark Tree. And that leadership team was built of myself, my wife, and 4 other staff members. And all of them have gone through our leadership development program at Refuge Church, which we call Lead Team, and allows people to sit under each staff pastor for 6 weeks, and allows them to be developed and grown in their ministry and find direction for their life. And so with all of that, my vision casting in all of this was God's given me a vision or a calling in my life, and my calling is threefold, I feel, called to bridge generational, cultural, and socioeconomic divides. And when we went to Mark Tree's a diverse community, and we were able to see that, based on, demographic studies and stuff like that we did previously to it, that it was culturally diverse, it's generationally diverse, and it's very socioeconomically divided. So seeing those things led us to Mark Tree and allowed us to know that, hey, this is God's leading for us. It matches up with my calling. It matches up with the vision that we have for this. And then we just relayed that to our staff and to our church. Mm-hmm. And by relaying that over, we had buy-in from not only the leadership team in the Jonesboro campus, but we also had buy-in from the church members themselves, from the congregants that made up Refuge Church. And really, if you're sharing the heart of God with people, it's hard for people to not buy into it. If they're connected in the Spirit, then they're going to be connected to the heart of God. And if you can expose a facet of the heart of God, people are going to buy into that.
Yeah.
And it's important that you have buy-in. You've got to have people that buy into your vision, mm-hmm. Or you won't have any support. And I'm very thankful that not only has my pastor and our staff bought into our vision, but our community in Mark Tree has bought into our vision. And mm-hmm. we receive support not just from Jonesboro, but we receive support from Mark Tree as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answered your question or not. But
that's perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
I guess we're done.
Matt Smith, and I am 45, and I'm the senior pastor at Refuge Church in Jonesboro, Arkansas. And I've been here as the senior pastor for almost 12 and a half years. And before that, I was a youth pastor here for almost 7 and evangelism pastor for 3.
Okay. How did you get into leadership?
So as far as my journey with leadership goes, I kind of always knew that was something that I wanted to do. Not back before I felt a call into ministry, because I always, even in like junior high age, my interest in career was always something that would be revolving around leadership. I wanted to coach, but then I wanted to teach, and so and then I've got a teaching degree, and so I kind of always had an awareness of wanting to lead something, and so I pursued that with my education, and so that kind of moved me that direction.
Okay. What is one thing that you wish you knew about leadership before you became a leader?
There are probably several things. One of them would have been to hone my following skills before I was in a place of leadership. And another thing I wish I would have known would have been to enjoy following while I had the chance to just follow and not have to be responsible to lead. But seriously, like really, I wish I would have developed more ability to understand and appreciate the role of authority and leadership, so that I could have maybe related to it a little healthier, before I was moved into it. Because on this side of it, you understand the kind of the stresses and the weight and the responsibilities and the things you don't understand until you're in it. I wish I could have understood earlier, because if I had, I think I would have. No, I know. I know that when I was on the other side, more following than leading, if I had known some things about leadership, I would have probably stewarded my bosses, pastors, and leaders a lot differently if I could have understood what it was to be a leader.
Yeah. Okay. What has been your greatest reward in leadership?
One thing that stands out above everything else, and I know it's partly because of one of the gifts that I have, but the greatest reward that I see is when somebody connected to me grows in any way. When I see actual life change, whether it is somebody who's training to be a leader, or if it's just somebody in the church that's just getting a hold of things in God and taking steps forward, that's the best. To see somebody else move forward, that's the most rewarding thing ever.
Awesome. And what's been your greatest challenge in leadership?
It's challenging to, early on, it was challenging to be a leader and not take on everyone who was a follower, taking on my followers' successes and failures as if they were my own. Like my wife and I, our first few years of youth ministry really carried everybody, how all of the young people in the youth group, we carried all that really heavy. Like, so if they were, if there was a lot of them that were having a lot of challenges or failing or making bad choices, we wore that really heavy, like it was all our responsibility. And if they were doing well, then we felt free to enjoy life and be happy. But if they weren't, it was very hard for us to go home and enjoy life and remember it. And there were conversations where we would have to go home and remind ourselves, we're still saved. We still love each other. We still love God. And even if other people are making choices that we can't help, it's still okay for us, to walk with joy and freedom and victory. But it was very hard for us at first to learn not to carry and the problem is, if you have more than one person following you, even if you have a small setting, a small organization, a small church, even if it's just a few, those lives are going to be so up and down at any given moment based on what they're experiencing. It will make you emotionally and mentally, emotionally schizophrenic. If you are connected to their ups and downs, and they don't need you to be. They need somebody that's going to be stable.
Yeah.
Because when they come to you for help, they don't need you being depressed with them. They need you to help pull them out. So that for us, that was one of the greatest challenges.
Yeah. Okay. What has surprised you the most about being in leadership? I promise that this will end up making sense. I promise, I hope. The degree to which it's okay to not always know the right answer all the time. Because when you're before you're in leadership, if you've had some good leaders, like I had some pastors that I really loved and respected, and especially when I was young, and my grandmother was a pastor, and
my grandfather and my dad were deacons, and my grandpa had a very successful business that he owned and ran, and so I saw people in leadership that I had a lot of respect for and looked up to, and they did well at leading people. And I guess because I just had a good perception of them, I had this idea that, really good leaders always have the answer.
Yeah.
That's the person that's always got it figured out. And then when you get there yourself and you realize I don't always have it figured out, you quickly realize it's not just you.
Mm-hmm.
My grandpa didn't always have the right answer, and he still had loyal employees and a successful business. Didn't always have every single thing figured out, and you don't have to. I guess I felt like to be the best leader, you would just always have to have all the right answers, and nobody's going to.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about leadership is, and being successful is, you don't have all the right answers. You know how to get the right answers.
Yeah.
You know who to go to, and in spiritual leadership, most importantly, you understand how to interact with God in a way that you can get the right answers that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it really surprised me to find out, really successful leaders don't always have the right answers. They know how to get to them, but
Right.
you have moments where you don't exactly know what to do,
Yeah.
and that's okay. That's not a problem.
What is something that people don't realize about leadership? I'm going to speak to a fleshly inclination about leadership, but I'll redeem it. Because leaders, both of spiritual nature and in other realms, it is the absolute temptation to make your leadership, whether you own a business or you pastor a church or whatever you do, it is the absolute temptation for that to be your identity. Obviously, a born-again person should have a better understanding of their identity in Christ, regardless of what they do. Leadership is something they do; it's not something they are. Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, as a leader, even when you know who you are in Christ, what you lead is part of you. And I would say any classroom teacher in the 3rd grade
Mm-hmm.
or 7th grade math teacher will tell you that what goes on in the classroom is connected, and it is all personal. You have to learn that in reality, especially in spiritual leadership, that in reality it's not. And you have to, unfold that from your thinking and mature and come to be able to separate the fact that this isn't all about me at all.
Mm-hmm.
But what people that have never, maybe if you've never at all been in leadership, you might not understand that what you lead is very personal. And the reason it is because generally, unless you're some sort of, compromised leader, you have put your blood, your tears, your sweat, your time, your energy, you've sacrificed, your family has suffered, you have neglected yourself, you have been, in many cases, especially in church, in many cases you've cared more about someone else's spiritual condition than they care.
Yeah.
And you put all this investment in, it's hard for it to not all be personal.
Mm-hmm.
And for instance, I'll give you one example. When people, let's say you're leading either a ministry or a church, and people leave, for whatever reason, doesn't matter what the reason is, they don't know when they leave. They don't understand why it's not. People will say to you, well, Pastor, we're moving across town, we're closer to that other church, or our children really have a lot of friends in school now that go to this other church, or we feel led by God to go to this other place. And then they think that when they tell you that'll be an answer. Then I feel relieved and it won't ever bother me that's happening because I know they've got a great reason.
Yeah.
That's not how it feels. You feel hurt and rejected because you poured time and energy into them,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like, either you've done something wrong or, is that right? No, leaders need to, especially pastors, need to get past that
Mm-hmm.
to where you can let it go. But the reality is that's a struggle because you have so much invested that everything is personal, and people on the other side of it don't know that, and that's fine. They don't have to, but I think that's one thing that you don't know until you've been there is that everything is so very personal to you, and to a degree, if it's not, you're probably not doing it right.
Right.
You know, if it's a job to you, that's a problem.
Yeah.
You know, because your heart, especially in spiritual ministry, your heart's going to be involved with people. And so learning to balance that is tough, but I think that's something that people probably don't know.
How do you balance your personal life, life in ministry, and life in leadership?
The older you get, hopefully you learn to do it better. Because early on I was terrible at this. You have to learn some principles first. And one of them is that you have to unlearn the unwritten rules. The written rules are, if you've gone through any kind of Bible education, spiritual education, you have been taught that, you know, God is first in your life. Your family comes next. Ministry is somewhere, you know, below that. That's what you're formally taught.
Yeah.
What we've all actually been taught if we grew up, especially in old school Pentecostal church, is ministry's above God and everything. Nobody says that. But I mean, I had pastors when I was a kid that, I mean, the church, the people, everything was first above even their own health and their own everything. And a lot of us had that example set before us. Of course, they wouldn't have told us that because we know cognitively that's a bad approach. But in reality, that's what a lot of us have seen. And so you have to unwire that. The first thing is you have to unwire that from your thinking. And then decide that any feelings of guilt when you have to say no to an opportunity or no to a person, you have to really challenge that guilt, because it's not coming from a place in God. That's coming from an enemy or a previous example. Because if you start trying to unravel that, you're going to begin to feel guilty when you have to tell somebody no, and you will. If you asked how do you balance correctly? Well, you decide where your boundaries are, and they have to be clear ones. It can't be, well, we'll figure it out. No, if you say I'm going to figure it out as I go, what you'll actually do is compromise all boundaries you would have set. And before you know it, you're working too late. It took my board a lot of years ago saying to me, it's time for you to stop working till 2 a.m. For some things to change for me. And so you have to let go of the guilt. You have to realize that ministry really does need to come after your God and your family. And then you have to build real boundaries and then follow them and let somebody be accountable to somebody. And as far as a man goes in ministry, he needs to shut up and listen to his wife. And when she says, I'm worried about you, you need to listen to her. And when she says, you're not acting right, are you feeling okay? You don't want to say, well, I'm kind of tireder than normal, or you don't want to admit that stuff, but you better. God puts the relationships he puts in your life to help be a safeguard to you, and you need to use them. And so, my wife and I have learned to bounce off each other and really be honest about what we see so that we can build right boundaries and then and follow through on them. And here's the thing that I've learned about it. I had somebody say to me not long ago when I was on a hospital visit, spending time with a lady that's been in our church for years and years and years and years and years and years, and has had, I'm probably the 4th pastor she's had here. She said, you're the first pastor that we've ever had that prioritized their family, and we've had to get used to it. And but the people will get used to it. When you show them, look, it's not about that this is not, the church, the people aren't important to me. It is that I've got one chance, and I've said this publicly from the pulpit, I get one chance. We have one child, and I get one chance with her. We're about 7 or 8 years from her being out of the house forever. I've got 7 or 8 more years to get it right, and that's all I get. After she's gone, might I be more of a workaholic and do more crazy junk? Yeah, probably. That's a possibility. But right now, I can't do that. And so, yeah, it's build boundaries and follow through on them.
Yeah. Okay. Did you always plan to be in leadership? And if so, about when did you feel called to be a leader?
Yeah, like I said earlier, that was early. That was like 6th, 7th grade. I know I'm going to teach, or I'm going to coach, or I'm going to do something. People always came to me to teach them to do things, or if they needed advice, like in middle school. I was a reject kid that was like, I was an outcast in a lot of ways, but yet people would find their way to me for advice. They didn't want to be my friend, but they would come to me for help. And so it became obvious that, I'm going to be in a situation, and I wanted to be in a situation at least. So yeah, 6th, 7th grade, I knew it. Yeah.
Okay. And what advice would you have for new or aspiring leaders, whether it be like ministerial leadership or secular?
To understand something I already mentioned earlier, the greater your capacity to follow with a submissive, humble, sincere heart, the greater capacity you have to lead. So develop that your whole life. And even the higher levels you get into of leadership, always look for the person you're to submit to.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I am, the pastor of a local church. And, obviously in our organization, we're not, we don't have people looking over our shoulder from the national organization, like right over our shoulder, telling us every move to make. We're a sovereign church and all of that. So, especially when you're the pastor at a local place, you could feel like you're at the top of the food chain. You can't ever get there. You've got to say, who am I submitting to? Okay, I'm at, for this campus, I may be at the, the leader, but who do I submit to? Besides God. That's an obvious. If you're not submitting to God, you got major problems. But the other thing is, who's the person I'm submitting to? And look for that your whole leadership life. And God will put people in place to do that. There'll be structural people, obviously. My presbyter, my superintendent are people that are my pastors. And I call them that when I see them because it's serious to me. Mm-hmm. And I will submit to them. But there's other people that God will bring into your life. And so you look for those. But the other thing about leadership is this, that I would say to anybody young that's going into it. It's a long journey. Be very forgiving with yourself. The temptation in leadership is, I'm leading people, and man, I made a mistake, and the world is going to end. No, it's not going to end. You're going to make a lot more before it's over. Mm-hmm. Moses made some pretty bad mistakes. He didn't even get to go where the people got to go. That making him a bad leader. You have to have a lot of grace for yourself, and be encouraged. Don't be given to discouragement, because the enemy wants to discourage you to bring an effect on those who follow you. Yeah. Always resist. So always be resilient, and always resist discouragement, and just know this is a long journey. I will learn as I go, and you have a lot of grace for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have an extra question that I didn't send you.
Okay.
So as a leader, you should be casting vision for the people that you're leading and creating goals and all those things. So what does that process look like for you?
It starts in one place for me, and that is prayer, and that is communion with God. So God downloading into your heart. However you do that, you've got to make the space. And it's hard when you have a lot of leadership plates already spinning. Mm-hmm. You're praying for this budget to be met, and for these people to be healed, and for this problem to get solved, and the maintenance. You're always praying maintenance prayers, and and all that's necessary. But there's also got to be carved out space for you to vision with God. Mm-hmm. Where it's not all about the demand of today, but it is about, okay, God, let's talk about tomorrow. What are you seeing? What are you showing me? And give the space for him to talk to you about it. That's where it begins. And then from that, I always say that you're always seeking the heart of God and the mind of God. The heart of God is the vision. This is where you want to go. This is what he wants to accomplish. But the mind of God is the strategy to get there. So once you've attained, God, you want to do this in this city or with our church, then the next thing you're going to pray is, give me the strategy. What's your mind? How do we get there step by step? Mm-hmm. And then once you start knowing that, once you've got the heart of God, the mind of God, then you can start being the mouth of God, and you can start laying it out for the people. They don't have to know all the strategy from the beginning, But then I lay out vision and I do it every year with our theme process. As we lay out the theme for the new year, I start with the inner circle and work out. Staff knows first what the new theme is and how we're going to implement it. Then we go to the other leaders like deacons and trustees. Then we go with our volunteer summit at the beginning of the year with all of the ministry, the people who work in ministry in the church, and we reveal the new direction and the way we're going to get there. And then finally we reveal it to the church, so that by the time we get it to the church, there's broad-based buy-in from all leaders, and they can regurgitate the vision and help me explain it as people have questions and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of my process.
Perfect.
My name is William Allen, and my wife and I own a Christian Bible book gift store in Paragould, Arkansas, called Ignited Gifts. We're also pastors of a full gospel church called Living Word Fellowship in Corning, Arkansas.
Okay.
I was raised on a farm.
Yeah.
Was called into the ministry about the age of 15, and received my papers from the Assemblies of God, my ordination at 23.
Okay.
And
Yeah. So, how did you get into leadership?
well, initially, I took one of the tests in high school that was supposed to kind of help you determine which direction you're supposed to go in life, and all of my higher scores were in administration. So, but primarily, it was the call of the Lord on my life for ministry that put me in the direction of being a pastor and other positions of leadership.
Okay. What's one thing that you wish you knew about leadership and ministry before you got into leadership and ministry?
That's kind of a tough question. Probably having a better understanding of people.
Okay.
Yeah.
People can be a little hard sometimes.
Well, dealing with people, you deal with the good and you deal with the bad. And there are all kinds of circumstances and situations.
Yeah.
And so having an understanding that people aren't always going to either be nice or agreeable or kind might have helped a little bit.
Yeah.
It would have changed probably a little bit of expectation.
Okay, so what has been your greatest reward in leadership and in ministry?
Dealing with people. In ministry, the understanding of and watching how people get it whenever something just is illuminated in them, and to see them receive what the Lord has for them, and just kind of a sense of a wow factor in that is just so overwhelmingly wonderful to know that maybe in some small way you've helped lead them out of worry or depression or pain or questions or fear or doubt. That's, to me, there's no feeling that can describe that. Okay. And at the same time, The opposite of that is true whenever you've really tried and you see people who don't get it, either because they don't feel or they don't are not concerned or just plain don't want to. That's a little frustrating whenever you know that you've tried to help and that help has not been received because of stubbornness or whatever emotional or physical problems may be going on with that person.
Yeah. Okay. What has been your greatest, so you said your greatest reward was people. Would you say your greatest challenge was people as
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the greatest challenge is with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you never know how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
You know, and whenever we have people come into the store, it's always great to hear people say, "Oh, I love your store. You know, you have so much," and you know, and that's good because it rewards your work, it rewards your labor.
Yeah.
You know, and your planning and then whenever you have people who come in and look for things that you don't carry or that you don't have. Of course, as a small store, you can't carry everything, but there is a little bit of sense of disappointment in the fact that you didn't have or something that they could find that they could use.
Mm-hmm. So talking about the store, was it a challenge getting everything up and going, or was it something?
Well,
that was...
yeah, there were getting it up and going, finding and dealing with vendors, getting the being able to secure the property, the square footage. It all of that was a challenge, and then having to wait around while it was being finished and completed, and doing what we could to help the process. And once we got in the building, trying to put equipment together and everything, you know, we spent long hours, you know, 1, 2, 3 o'clock of the morning, putting pieces together and trying to get stuff ready. You know, so there were a lot of long days, long hours, and then getting the product priced, put out on the shelves, getting the computer up and running, and all of those were challenges. Dealing with computer people, especially whenever you're not real computer smart, you know, having to trust someone else, that's quite a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. What has surprised you the most about leadership in ministry and leading the store and opening a store? What's been the most surprising thing that's happened?
Surprising.
Or something that you didn't expect that has happened that you were like, oh, I didn't plan for that.
Well, I don't know. I kind of am a person who pays a lot of attention to detail, and so I tried to think things through and plan. But yeah, I guess there's always things that the computer system register and stuff like that was one thing that we kind of had difficulty with. That was something that we really had to work through.
Yeah.
Dealing with the vendors here at the store, that's been pretty smooth. Dealing with church people in church ministry can be a challenge sometimes, because sometimes you anticipate people to respond a particular way, and then whenever all of a sudden it's just a complete opposite of that, you have to stop and think about that, and you have to stop and think, how am I going to, what direction do I need to go now?
Yeah.
You know, since that's not happening, Lord, which way do you want me to go now? What decision do I have to make here?
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a challenge.
And you said you've been in ministry since you were 23?
I've been ordained with the Assemblies. I was ordained with the Assemblies at 23.
Okay.
I started preaching at the age of 15.
So working with people that long, nothing really surprises you
Not
too
too
much anymore.
Not too much anymore. I've got to the place to where I don't put pressure on myself to have a certain expectation of people.
Yeah.
I just do what I feel like needs to be done and leave how people respond to that up to them.
Yeah. Do you mean to?
No, that's our fax machine.
Oh, okay. What's something that people don't realize about being in leadership, whether in ministry or owning your own store? What's something that people don't understand about it?
Probably one of the things is the time element involved, the time that's required. And then possibly number two would be having to deal with all kinds of people in all kinds of situations, seeing the good, and that's wonderful, but being in situations to where things are really traumatic and things are out of order, and that can be really difficult.
Okay.
If you're not prepared for that.
Yeah. How do you balance your personal life, your life in ministry, owning a store? How do you balance all of the things that you do?
Well, having had the store now for over 5 years and having been in the ministry as long as I have, a lot of that has kind of taken care of itself. Simply because now you know the things that you need to do to prepare for one season to another. And in the ministry, you're constantly, at least me personally, I'm constantly praying and listening to Holy Spirit concerning messages and praying about those messages. And so there is a lot of time involved in that. And being the owner of a store, there's a lot of things you have to cut out. You don't get to go on vacation very much since we have a small store. And in the ministry, my feeling is I have a responsibility, and I take that responsibility very seriously. And so we don't get to do, or I don't get to do a lot of things that would be done otherwise. And so maybe that's just the way I am, feeling the responsibility of it. We're at the store 6 days a week, and we pastor full-time a church. So we spend 56 hours a week at the store, and then I preach Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. Well, there's not many days in the week left other than that. So we don't have a whole lot of time off. But the Lord helps us and enables us to do all of that. He's very kind to us in giving us the strength. And since we love what we're doing, it's not a big pressure to us.
Yeah.
It's not a drudgery. We come into the store and we enjoy fellowshipping with people. It's our store, so in our store we've been able to pray for people and see people saved and healed and set free, and we get to listen to gospel music all day long, and so it really is relaxing. So it's not a drudgery to us. It really is kind of an extension of our ministry. So we actually minister every day, all day long.
Yeah.
And whenever we go home, and I work with my wife, so we're not apart, and we love that. And so whenever we go home, we're able to sit down for a little while and just relax. and enjoy each other's presence and just rest, and that's great and that's wonderful, and and so enjoying what we do, and I enjoy the ministry. I enjoy that. There's I don't put pressure on myself now like I used to put pressure on myself in the ministry. Maybe that's because of the stage in life I'm at. But we're able to just really trust the Lord with everything. And whenever you learn to trust, then the pressure's off.
Yeah.
So that's powerful. That's a wonderful lesson to learn. That trust is a powerful asset for a child of God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so you talked earlier about the aptitude test that you took like in high school where you were always inclined towards administration. So has it always just been your plan to lead and to be in ministry?
I really did not know what my future was growing up. I was raised on a farm, so I didn't know whether I would grow up being a farmer. Probably is what my dad wanted. But whenever the Lord laid his hand on me to ministry, and I knew that he called me to preach his word, that became the single focus of what I believed was the direction for my life.
So from 15, is that what you said? 15 on, that was just always the plan.
That was always the plan.
Good. Okay. So I already talked about this. When did you feel called to be a leader? That was when you were about 15. So the last question, what advice would you have for people that are new to leadership and ministry, or people who aspire to be in leadership and in ministry? What advice would you have for them?
Well, number one is study and get your education. That's invaluable. Number two, if it's in the direction of ministry, your time with the Lord is invaluable. Your prayer life and Bible study life is, and you never get beyond that. Or at least I never get beyond that. You never learn it all. You never understand it all. As far as other things are concerned, I look back at the path that my life has taken, and I have found that everything that the Lord has allowed to happen in my life has brought me to the place of where I am now. I spent 5 years with Walmart in their leadership program, and I spent 18 years in another position for another company, and going through all of those steps, the things that I've learned in those positions in the public workplace, all helped prepare and lay the foundation for everything that I'm doing here and now. From learning how to build a display and to display product correctly and properly to make it look nice from a public's point of view, has all been part of the leadership, the learning process. And I found that in every step of life, don't be afraid to learn. Don't be afraid to ask questions.